Good evening. Happy AAPI Heritage Month to everyone. My name is Saren Chung. I'm one of the other founder of AAPI Westport, along with Patra and Rosie over there. Our group was founded in the spring of 2021 following a significant rise in violence and hate toward the AAPI community. Our mission is to foster a sense of belonging within our community, as well as create visibility and awareness throughout Westport and beyond. As Patra mentioned earlier, we organized a peaceful rally right outside the library on Jessup Green to come together in solidarity and stand up against violence toward Asian Americans. What had happened since then, and where can we go from here? This is what we'd like to discuss tonight with the panelists. I'd like to introduce to you Pauline Brody from OCA-FC, who will share with us a little bit about her organization and introduce our moderator, Vicky.
Thank you, Patra. Good evening. Wonderful turnout. OCA is a national organization with over 50 chapters around the country. We have been around for close to 50 years, would you believe it? Our mission is to advocate for the well-being of Asian Americans in every aspect of our lives. OCA-FC is our local chapter in Fairfield County, and we also have been around for close to 50 years. Miriam Young is our president, and she's on the panel. Yay. We also have a Chinese school that has been in operation in Ripplewan School in Stamford, Connecticut. At this time, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our outstanding role model for what Asian Americans can become in America. Our moderator, who personifies the immigrant story. She is now the acclaimed NBC investigative reporter. She was born in Saigon. Her family were, quote unquote, boat people who left the country in the turmoil, had to go to Malaysia in a refugee camp, right? And finally, an Oregon family sponsored them, and they came to the United States as immigrants. She was 2 years old. When she was 10, she became an American citizen. Like so many immigrants, she went to the university on scholarship, got her degree, communications, biology. Stanford University did not accept her, but she pivoted and chose a new direction in communications. She went all the way from California to Florida to take a job and became a one-man person, one-man show, carrying a camera, a heavy camera, and doing her stories. She took risks. She was hardworking, smart, and all of that, but she took risks, and she took jobs whenever they were offered. Challenges that were thrown her way, she took. She is now with NBC in New York, and her stories can be seen on all NBC platforms. On the Today Show, third hour of Today, nightly news with Lester Holt, and NBC News Now. We really look forward to your leadership in this discussion. Please welcome our distinguished speaker, Vicky Nguyen.
Pauline, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was such an introduction. Thank you. Thank you. My
goodness, that's a very tough act to follow. And that long pregnant pause, I didn't know what Pauline was going to say. It's really my honor and pleasure to be here with you all. This is my first time to Westport, Connecticut. My family and I just moved to the East Coast 3 years ago from California. For 2 years, we spent living in the Upper East Side of New York, just getting to know New York City before we recently moved to Westchester, which was a little more blue sky, backyard. We have a dog. We have 3 girls, so it's really nice to have a little more room to run around. But my colleague, Craig Melvin, lives up here. He knows Saren, which is kind of, how I ended up here. But I see why you all live here. It's absolutely a beautiful community, and I love to see all the faces here, not just the Asian American ones, but everyone. And as we just saw in that powerful film, I think it is a reminder of all the things we have in common, and that it will take us working together and seeing our shared humanity to try to overcome some of the racial division and bias that we see now. So I'm just so encouraged to see you all here. I think we're going to have a lively discussion over the next 40 minutes, and I'm not going to take too much more time. Let me just at least introduce our panelists, and then we'll open it up to discussion. And we would love to get audience questions. We actually have a microphone set up right there, so we'll make sure we leave plenty of time at the end. And frankly, in between too. I mean, I think thoughts come to you, so feel free to raise your hand, and we'll just make time for the dialogue. I think that's why we're all here, is to learn and to better understand each other. No wrong question, and we have a great group of people here who can participate in the discussion and hopefully provide some insight too. I'll start here on my right with Patra Kanchangnagam. She is one of the co-founders of AAPI Westport, along with Saren. Yes. As you know, the organization formed in 2021 to create a sense of belonging within the AAPI community, as well as increase visibility and awareness in Westport and beyond. AAPI Westport has organized various events around town, so if you've seen those Stop Asian Hate rallies, AAPI holiday celebrations, those workshops on AAPI history for middle school students and high school students, that's in large part to this group right here. And Patra went to Brown University. She actually graduated with a BA in psychology and an MAT in elementary education. She worked as an educator before moving to Westport 10 years ago. She has 3 kids, and she's also an active member of the PTA and serves on the executive boards at the elementary and middle school levels. And she's also a member of Together Effectively Achieving Multiculturalism, Team Westport. So we have a great community member in Patra. Next up, of course, probably, this is your Attorney General. He is actually the 25th Attorney General, William Tong, here in Connecticut. He is the first Asian American elected at the state level. He is also the son of immigrant parents and grew up here helping his parents' Chinese restaurant over in the Hartford area. Is that very close to here, Westport? Not so close? Yeah, not that close, not that close.
Close enough.
I'm new to the East Coast, sorry. I don't know where anything is. He graduated from Phillips Academy, Andover, Brown University, and the University of Chicago Law School, where Barack Obama was actually one of his professors. He practiced law as a litigator in both the state and federal courts for 18 years. He was most recently at Finn Dixon and Hurling LLP in Stamford. He also served here for 12 years as a state representative in the Connecticut General Assembly. He was the House Chairman of the Judiciary Committee as well as the Banking Committee. And he has been your Attorney General since 2018. Notable, yes, yeah, a lot of support in this community. He's notable and has established himself as a national leader among state attorneys general in fighting opioid addiction, defending consumer rights against utilities, and safeguarding civil rights and freedoms of immigrants and minority groups. And so we're really excited for your leadership and your conversation tonight as well. Thank you for being here. I'll turn it over next to Miriam Young, who is here. She has been a tireless advocate for the Asian American community for many years, serving, as you heard Pauline say, within OCA, locally and nationally, and also with many other organizations, including as vice chair and treasurer at the Connecticut chapter of Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages. She is an educator. She's actually brought some props to talk to us about how to encourage students to open up and have these discussions about race and differences. And you are currently back in the classroom, right? Teaching, yes, teaching English as a second language to grades 6 to 10 at the Classical Magnet School and Hartford Magnet Trinity College Academy in Hartford Public Schools. And she went to Queens College, Flushing, New York, right? You majored in both Asian language and literature as well as elementary education. So we're super happy to have you here too, Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, Mike, is it Keogh?
Yep.
Mike
that's it.
Keogh, yes. If you have ever seen the hashtag on social media, I am not a virus, that was Mike. He is a storyteller, and he's also the founder of that movement, and now is changing it to make us visible. We'll talk more about that and why that's an important campaign, but Mike also served on Governor Lamont's Hate Crime Council. He's a wedding photographer as well, photographing weddings across the country, Europe and Asia. He lives here in West Hartford with his wife and his 2 boys. And by the way, I Am Not Virus, that is a brand new campaign. Unfortunately, it started in March of 2020 when we started hearing a lot more of that rhetoric that fueled, as the data shows and the studies have shown, more anti-Asian sentiment in this country, because words matter, and words that come down from the top spur people to act, and sometimes in hateful ways. So Mike's efforts have been incredible. He's also going to talk about an incredible bill that's basically on its way to the governor's desk here in your state, Connecticut, that will teach Asian American history in K through 12 schools. So fantastic, Mike. Chairs were not designed for my shoes. Okay, so let me just open it up. I really would like to hear the panelists' thoughts after watching that really powerful 1-hour film, documentary, giving us a sense of the history of Asian Americans in this country and what's happened over the last 2 years. I've sensed a seismic shift in the way this community feels comfortable in talking about even these issues. Because I'll tell you, I'm 43, I wasn't born here, and I really did not reckon with all of this until the last few years, when it became imperative for us to talk about it. Because I was taught, like many of us, you keep your head down, you work hard, especially as a journalist. We are to remain as impartial and neutral as possible. We are to try to put aside our bias when reporting and to be as objective as possible. And I come to realize after 20 plus years as a journalist, when you bring your whole self to the job and when you acknowledge that you do have life experiences, you do have bias based on all of the things that you bring to the table as a human being, it's better to be transparent and to recognize those things and to seek to balance them than to pretend they don't exist. And I will say I've felt more permission to speak out and to pitch those stories in my newsroom and to push for coverage of all kinds of issues that do have to do with identity, that can be personal. And I realize that that can be a benefit to how you cover stories because you have that experience that you can see it in a different way. Not to say that you bring your experience to color the story and the coverage, but you bring it to enrich what you're talking about. And I'm curious for all of you in the various positions as educators, as politicians, as grassroots organizers, how long have you been reckoning with your Asian American identity and bringing it to the fore in the work and the public service that you do?
So, I'm the child of refugees. I am 1 generation removed from genocide. I shouldn't be here right now. When I think about anti-Asian hate crimes, I think about my parents and that they survived so much to live in fear. The beginning of the pandemic, I had talks with my parents. Dad, don't go to Home Depot. It's not safe. Mom, stay home. I had fears for my wife, who is Hmong American. Her parents are refugees. And, she's a frontline medical worker. And I was worried, would my wife be accosted today? And this rhetoric, it's not new. We grew up knowing what neighborhoods not to visit because there were anti-Asian violence growing up, right? But we didn't have the language to discuss what my parents were feeling or experiencing. When we think about anti-Asian hate crimes, I think of Vandy Fong, a 13-year-old boy, Cambodian refugee, killed by an 11-year-old in 1989 in Lowell, Mass. 15 years later, or about 20 years later, about 10 minutes away, there was a young boy named Bang Mai, Vietnamese American, that was stabbed on the playground. So when I was hearing this rhetoric back in February, I knew I wanted to do something. I just didn't know what to do. And I took photos of Asian Americans across Connecticut. I had them come to the studio. And I wanted to create artwork that showcased that we are neighbors, that attack against an Asian American was an attack against someone in your community. And I wanted to give us the joy of expressing ourselves, that we are not viruses, then who are you? And what do you love about yourself? And yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
My journey started with the unfortunate killing of Vincent Chin. And I've always been interested in interrelations and intercultural communication. And so at the undergraduate level at Queens College, we were quite diverse. Everyone in the library had its own table, you know, the Italians, the Germans, the Chinese, and it broke up into 3 different groups of Chinese: American-born Chinese, China-born, or Taiwan. But because I am bilingual, I was able to speak to all 3 groups, and I did not like to be labeled. So I visited all the groups. I was interested in their viewpoints, their rationale, their family, and so I continued with that. And I joined OCA back then, and I'm a proud member of 4 different chapters because we moved 7 times with my husband. And then majored in education, and I wanted to bring that love with me. And so I started teaching, luckily, at all the different places we lived in, but I was a novelty. I was an interesting individual because I had this face. Imagine teaching in Lincoln, Nebraska in the 70s. And at that time, I was a substitute teacher and was asked during recess when a little girl motioned me to bend down, and I did, and she said, whispering, "Are you black?" So I said, "This is an opportunity." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm Chinese. And it's okay to ask that question." She stood up, ran back to her friends and yelled, "It's okay, it's okay." So we need to start feeling comfortable, first knowing our history, our true history, and sharing that, those stories and those experiences, so that young children are not afraid to ask those questions. Because if we don't speak of those stories and share them, then they will fill in the missing blanks. And that's not good, to try to open the communication.
Let me first thank Petra and Saren and all the organizers for having us here tonight. These conversations happen too seldom, and we don't get the chance to open up and be honest with each other. Tonight, I just want to acknowledge that we lost a giant in the AAPI community. Former Secretary Norman Mineta has passed at 90, served Democratic and Republican administrations as Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of Transportation, famously played a role in grounding the planes on 9/11, was a war hero, and began his life in an internment camp. And so I think we should all reflect on who he was and his contributions and how we stand on his shoulders here tonight. The question is, how long have I been reckoning with my identity in being an Asian American and Pacific Islander and a Chinese American who was born in Hartford, Connecticut to immigrant parents? And the answer, of course, is my whole life and every day. If you go, I'm your Attorney General, yes, but if you go to my Twitter feed, you'll probably see somebody saying something about me and my race. I'm routinely accused of being an agent for the Chinese Communist Party. I've been called the Manchurian AG. Right after I was elected, I was called Kim Jong-Tong.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't say that because you should feel sorry for me, because I'm honored to be your Attorney General. But if you're honest with yourself, you reckon with it every single day. I woke up this morning as the son of Chinese immigrants who grew up in a Chinese restaurant, and I'll go to bed that way. And I think if I, in this journey, have grown up in a way and learned something lately, I think what you're hearing is, the fancy word is intersectionality, right? But what that means to me is how so many of our stories have common elements. And when Vicky was introduced as the daughter of boat people, well, it occurred to me, well, aren't I boat people too? You know, literally.
Right.
And figuratively.
At some point, yes.
At some point. And I often share my story, and I recall how when our former president talked about and railed against anchor babies, right? This idea that immigrants come here as tourists and have children so they can establish a beachhead for citizenship. It occurred to me, well, my parents weren't citizens when I was born, so I'm an anchor baby too. And when he talked about denaturalizing American citizens, my parents and grandparents are naturalized citizens. He must have been talking about them too. And the final thing, and I've spoken about this here on the green, you know, when people at our southern border families and children were put in camps at the border, people would say to me, I can't believe that we do this in America and that we're capable of such cruelty. And I'm quick to say, why can't you believe it? We did it to Japanese American citizens no more than 75 years ago. Citizens. And so that understanding those linkages, and by the way, when I tell these stories and share these linkages, you see that people from other communities, from the Black community, from the Latino and Hispanic community, from other immigrant and refugee and communities of color, the Jewish community, you know, there is so much overlap and common experience, so much that we share. And if you want to talk about how to get over anti-Asian hate, it's to bring us closer to each other so that everybody understands that we come from the same place.
Thank you so much for that.
I guess like everyone else on the panel, I am also the child of immigrants from Thailand specifically, and to the question of, you know, how long I've been dealing or reckoning with my Asian American identity, I will echo William Tong's statements that pretty much all my life I grew up in an all-white community, and it wasn't really until I went to college and was around other people who looked like me and who understood my experience as a child of immigrants or as an Asian American that I realized how long of my life I spent trying to fit in instead of feeling like I belonged. And I think that's a really important distinction, because fitting in means you have to change yourself to fit whatever mold or expectation that people have of you. Belonging is you can show up as you are and be accepted for who you are. And I didn't realize I didn't feel that sense of belonging until I got to college. And for me, you know, the part of the reason why myself and Saren and Rosie and some other moms in town started AIPI Westport was, for me, the motivation was, you know, we had this rally because there was this uptick in violence against Asian Americans, and we were, you know, kind of put in this place where we're like, what can we do? How can we help? And Team Westport was gracious enough to have sort of a talking, listening session for the Asian American community and allies to come and talk. And one of the major things that struck me when we were having this conversation was how very little has changed. You know, we had a cross-section of Asian Americans in town, from, you know, our Asian American elders to students, and the stories that we all shared were the same. racial slurs were the same. The phrases that were yelled at us were the same. And when I was listening to this, I was thinking to myself, you know, I grew up in a time period where colorblindness was the word du jour, right? And it was a melting pot. And that was supposed to solve all the ills of racism in our society. And I thought, wow, it didn't help anything. It didn't change anything because we're still seeing and experiencing the same things that the kids today are experiencing the same things that I experienced. And why is that? Why hasn't it changed? And so for me, the impetus and the drive to do things like start AP Westport and have discussions like this is to really change things for everybody, for all the kids in town and all the kids everywhere. So hopefully by opening up conversations and coming together, we can really actually make change and not just talk about it.
Thank you, Sarah. Patra. All right. And speaking of making that change and bringing that education, I do want to ask you, Mike, to talk about what's going to happen. What is in this bill that you expect the governor to sign? And, you know, how do you think that's going to help us with combating some of this anti-Asian sentiment?
So the bill provides for a curriculum to be built for 2025. There's $140K and having a curriculum writer for this. And it's the first time in the country. There's been 2 other bills passed. We passed the bill in New Jersey back of May of 2020. No, May of 2021, I'm sorry. May 2021, passed the bill in New Jersey, and we passed the model curriculum in Connecticut. The model curriculum had and it provided $360K for a model curriculum to be completed for K-8 Asian American history and experiences. This new one, makes it mandatory inside the general statutes. So every time there's a new curriculum being built, Asian Americans will automatically be included with every other group. So
that's right.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage any audience member, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand or just go right up to the mic and we'll address the question.
Should I answer the second part of the question about how? I'm sorry.
Yeah, please do. Yes, absolutely.
You know, for me, I have 2 kids. One of them is in kindergarten, and the other one's 3. He's starting pre-K. And I wish I had that growing up. You know, I didn't understand what it meant to be Asian American until college, like many people here. When Alan Tan, who's over there, he's on the commission. When we were in college, we ran a conference on hate crimes against Asian Americans. Wow. And this is where we met William Tong and Miriam. So the work that's being done has been built on the back of giants. So thank you both for, you know, guiding us back then and now. For my kids, I think one thing that bothered me when my kid entered pre-K was that there were stories about talking animals before there were stories about Asian Americans or Black families or Latinx families. And I didn't know how to communicate my frustration. You know, this is before pandemic. I didn't know how to express myself without feeling anger and animosity. And I reached out to his teacher, and she ends up reading a book the next day called Bim Bim Bop. You know, we had a pleasant conversation. And during this book, my son's eyes lights up. It's during remote learning. And he lights up because there's a rice cooker in it. And Cole goes, "We have one!" And he screams on the top of his lungs in the sunroom, and I hear him in the kitchen. And he goes, "We have the cuckoo," and it sings every time it's done. So he goes, "It makes this sound." And he hums the tune, right? For his class.
A rice cooker, okay.
Yep. And his teacher, without missing a beat, asked the rest of the class, "Do you help your parents cook?" And all of a sudden, you have kids talking about pierogies and dumplings and rice and spaghetti. And at that moment, my son's experience was seen and validated. And it was something really small, but you could see his confidence grow. And to have these experiences, right, as the child of refugees, I was embarrassed when I had to translate for my grandmother. I was embarrassed that the only time my parents came to my school was for conferences. I think if I knew about sorry, I'm overwhelmed still with the bill being passed. But if I'd known about my own history, I would have seen my family as superheroes.
I'm sure they're really proud of what you're doing now, though. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. This is such a supportive audience. Half the time we're clapping. So, Miriam, let me ask you that. On the note of education, because it's true, we talk about it, but representation matters. A big part of why I decided to, move my entire family, my parents included, I'm an only child, from the West Coast to the East Coast for an opportunity at the network level. There was a part of me that thought, I have to at least try, because if some kid out there sees my last name, which is like the Vietnamese Smith, it's like the most common Vietnamese last name, then they will have that experience of if you can see it, you can be it. So I thought I have to just go there and take that chance. And if it lasts a year or 2 years, or now we're into 3 years and a new contract, so that's good. But I just thought we have to try to do that because representation matters so much. But Miriam, you're a teacher. How do we have those moments and those dialogues, and what kinds of conversations can we have or questions can we ask of each other and not worry about offending other people? Because I think that is concerning. I find that when I'm talking to people about other, classes they may be in. But I think if you're earnest and you have the right intention, the words don't have to be perfect.
I'm sorry. When I create lessons, I don't think about offending anyone. My purpose as an educator is to educate and to broaden the minds of young people and expand their knowledge. So if I'm in the classroom, say kindergarten, first grade, and we're going to read a story, and students love props and manipulatives as well. If I put this out on my desk, I immediately have gotten curiosity, and you have the students' attention, all right? It's black hair. When growing up, I didn't have any dolls, okay? I'm sorry, Barbie. And the only doll I had was a rag doll that had black yarn because none of the dolls looked like me. But how wonderful now you go into a toy store, you have a wide variety, all right? The child does not have to look like the doll that he or she purchases, all right? They can have a collection. I have gone on my way to collect. I'm preparing for the future generations, my sons and my granddaughter and a grandson to come. Expose them to the richness of people and be able to tell those stories. So it's very important to have models, whether it's in film, whether it's in media, whether it's in stories and pictures on TV. It's so important to you see yourself and you feel totally, acknowledged, and your humanity is recognized. And that's what all people everywhere are asking for. I have those same values as you do. I want to do well. I want to take care of my family. I want the younger generation to be educated, and then the sky's the limit. Whatever you pursue, do and be the best.
Thank you. William, can you talk about in politics where there are very few Asian Americans, what is that like for you? Do you feel a pressure to represent for all of us, which is a very diverse and not monolithic community? And do you find that you are feeling like you have to speak on behalf of not just your constituents, but also people who look like you, and they can't distinguish if you're Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese oftentimes?
Yes, of course, but that's just the start. That's the beginning of it. We've said a few times in the film, they said representation matters. Yeah, representation matters, but it's not enough. And I think if I can be critical of Eugene's film, it missed that point. We have an Asian American Studies law that's about to get signed by the governor because Mike Keogh showed leadership. Okay, he didn't just show up and was himself. He put his shoulder into it and made it happen. He was texting me every 5 minutes yesterday. Did it pass? Did it pass? Did it pass? It's true. And it was really annoying after a while. But what you didn't see in the representations were, with all due respect, business leaders and other than Andy Kim, political leaders and academic leaders. And that's a stereotype that is often foisted upon us as well. not just that we're quiet or deferential or humble and all that nonsense, but one that I think the community indulges itself is that we're not leaders, or that leadership comes at too great a cost. And the problem with that is that representation, for example, at a big law firm, there's plenty of representation. At big New York City law firms, hardly any partners, okay? And there's plenty of representation at Goldman Sachs, okay? How many managing directors, right? How many people that lead practice areas? And why is that important? Because in the business world, the leaders make decisions on investment, right? On communities, on new products, new markets. And if you don't have Asian American leaders, then they're not focusing on our community. In the political system, the House and Senate passed a budget, on Monday, and there's like currently three AAPI legislators out of 187, because I'm no longer in the room. I'm your Attorney General, so I'm no longer a frontline lawmaker in the legislature. 3 voices, 2 in the minority, right? And not enough advocacy for us in the state budget and where we're going to spend money on education, curriculum, law enforcement, right? Mental health services, child care, social services. So if you don't have leadership and you don't develop leaders and you don't demand of each other that we step up and lead, then you don't get to demand recognition and investment for our community. And so I think, candidly, they missed that point. And so I would just encourage everybody to think well beyond representation. And by the way, why does it matter? It matters for moments like right now, right? When so many people in our community feel like they literally have a target on their backs. And no one's going to do anything about it unless people who look like us have a seat literally at the table advocating for more law enforcement resources, more educational resources.
On that note, I just did an interview with the chief of detectives for NYPD. NYPD is the largest police department in the country. They have a department of 4,000 detectives alone, and in that, they have 22 detectives dedicated to investigating hate crimes. And last year, they formed an Asian hate crimes task force. It's a voluntary basis made up of officers of all levels, but they're about 25, and they speak a bunch of different languages, which is remarkable. And it's a model that they share with police chiefs across the country, talking about different ways to try to address the rise in anti-Asian crimes, period. FBI data shows hate crimes across all groups are up year over year over the last 2 years. But among Asian Americans, that group saw the highest spike, 224% rise. And what was interesting in New York, the data shows that while on the whole there are more anti-Semitic attacks against Jewish people, 75% of those attacks are words, like graffiti spray painted on a wall or a property crime of some sort. 95% of the hate crimes committed against Asian Americans are physical attacks. So there is a sense of real fear and anxiety in this community that continues to this day because these things happen. And whether technically they're characterized as a hate crime or not, that doesn't assuage people who walk around thinking, oh, a woman that looks just like me was pushed into the subway or followed into her apartment and stabbed to death. So there is that level of concern, which I think is what sparked Stop AAP or Westport AAPI. Let's talk about some of the things we think can help with that. Solutions. We talk about self-defense classes and being aware, but it takes more than that. What are you all doing in your individual lives? Do you feel more anxious about your personal safety, the safety of your family members, and have you made adjustments in how you live your life?
Well, I know my parents and my aunt, they live on Long Island, that's where I grew up, and they used to go into Flushing, Queens all the time to go shopping and get their haircuts and do all that kind of thing. And I know that they very consciously made a decision not to go anymore because they were afraid of walking around. They didn't feel safe to do so. And then part of that was the pandemic, but a lot of it was just seeing the rise in hate crimes against Asian people, and they just didn't feel safe doing that. But I think to answer part of your question, I mean, and Miriam kind of touched on this as well, I really feel like education is a way to mitigate some of these problems, because I do think children are very open to learning, and I think for them, and I don't know how to say, it's like it's more black and white for them. Like, I don't want to hurt you. Like, so for them, I think it makes sense. And I think as we get older, there's just more baggage put on that. And I think that's what AAPI Westport is trying to do. We're trying to educate the community as a whole. We're trying to assert our presence here. We're trying to say, like, we exist here. We are your friends and we are your neighbors. And these are the things that matter to us. These are things we want you to know about us. And I think for myself, and I think this kind of ties into how I grew up in a mostly white community, was I think I grew up with the idea that you should just be quiet and just be thankful that you're here, and don't cause any problems. And I realize now that wasn't the right way. Like, that wasn't going to solve anything. And so I think my advocacy work now is because I want people to know that I'm here. I want people to know that Asian American people are here, and we have our own issues and our own things that we want addressed and recognized. And I do feel like one of the things that we as a community can do is you can be allies to us. Check in with your friends, like, ask them, how are you feeling? I heard that news about the woman who got pushed onto the subway. How does that make you feel? Like, on a very personal level, like forming those personal relationships and not being afraid to ask really makes a big difference, because then you make us feel really seen. Like, I think I think personal relationships is another way to really wonderful. Make a difference.
So I do a lot of community outreach. One of my favorite communities is a group of farmers of color in the Simsbury area. They range from Asian American to Black, Jamaican, and Indigenous, and across the board. And I think about Vichette Im, who is a Cambodian American farmer, and she grows crops like Syrian eggplants. She grows stuff like bitter melon that I love. I love bitter melon. A lot of my friends hate bitter melon. I love it.
My mom loves it. It's very bitter, like so bitter. The most bitter.
I don't
you think
really
it's
like
poison.
it.
I don't like it either.
And Vichette grows bitter melon, and she brings them to markets across Connecticut. In Coventry, which is a mostly white market, she brings it there. She has to explain what this is. And when she goes to the North End Farmer Market in Hartford, she brings it, and there's this young girl from Trinidad that calls it Cordelia, and she comes every Sunday to pick it up to bring to her parents because her mom cooks it. Zania, who's half Jamaican and half Southern Black, is an farmer who grows bok choy, and she brings bok choy to her church. And she introduces bok choy, and they start making Jamaican cuisine using bok choy, and it's this wonderful experience. But on top of that, one of the things that we did was I'm Not a Threat, which I partnered with 2 community partners with this. And it was after I'm Not a Virus in the wake of George Floyd. And the question I asked Asian Americans were, if you're not a virus, then who are you, and what do you love about yourself? When we did this project called I'm Not a Threat, we photographed 30 different, about over 30 Black Americans from the greater Hartford area. And just like the I'm Not a Virus portrait series, they were diverse. They included LGBTQIA+, mixed race, members, adoptees. So we want to expand the voices and the stories. And the questions my partners came up with was, when did you first realize you were Black in America? And another thing that we did was we took 2 portraits, one of our community members smiling and one of them not smiling, because they shared that we feel like we have to smile in public to feel safe, for people to feel safe around us. So we did 2 portraits because of that. And the question was like, well, who is it? We have to protect our neighbors. And during the I'm Not a Threat, what I realized was that the language everyone had. You know, I met 2 people 30 years apart that weren't allowed to go to a birthday party or a friend's house because they were black in America. And these were, when it happened to them, they were 5 or 7. And, you know, they came home and their parents explained to them, this will happen to you, you know, because you are black in America. Another person explained that he was accused of plagiarizing all the time because he went to a private school. And his parents, when he was first accused, his parents came in and asked, why did you think my son plagiarized, right? And this followed him to college. And it made me think about my own personal experience of being accused of plagiarizing. I was accused of plagiarizing many times in high school and elementary school and middle school. And I didn't realize, because my parents thought it was because I was smarter than everyone else, which I'm not. You know, but when you called my house, my grandma spoke 5 languages, but not English. She spoke broken English. So when they called and I wrote a grade paper, they assumed, how can this kid that grows up in an apartment have the same, you know, capacity of towards the English language than his peers? And it made me realize that my experiences, while centering myself around black experiences, that my own personal experiences were a part of the American story. That my parents didn't have the language or the concept that I was being targeted, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think when we did I'm Not a Virus, so many Asian Americans couldn't say that what they experienced was racism. They said it was uncomfortable. They used language like ignorance, that, you know, maybe I mistook not being allowed into a store because, like, you know, it was on them. And I think that's so important to share our stories and be able to create that change locally within our communities. So when our petition came up, Westport showed up with like 40 signatures or 50 signatures. So thank you for that. In West Hartford, it was half Asian American and the other half were white, black, and Latinx families because we had these narratives and these conversations.
Yeah, those allies are important. I'm sorry, are you an audience member with a question? Yes, yay. Okay, please step up to the mic.
All right, yay. Thank you so much for this. And I want to say my mom loves bitter melon. I do not. I just want to publicly say thank you to everybody. And Saren inspired me. Last year, I came to the Stop Asian Hate rally here in Westport. I live in neighboring Fairfield, and I coordinated Stop Asian Hate rally there, and Attorney General Tong was there, and thank you for being here again. My question is around cross-cultural solidarity. I kind of want to get your take on that. My name is Amy Guerrero, and I am a school library media specialist in Bridgeport. So I do a lot of cross-cultural solidarity in my work. And to Mike, I want to say that you have a book. You have many children's books inside of you, and I would love to talk to you because it's an exciting time to be a children's book writer. There's so many people of color creatives right now, and it's awesome. I am proud to say that I'm one of 8 school librarians in Connecticut that last year I received a diversity book collection. And there were very few books with strong Asian characters. And I suggested one called Eyes That Kiss in the Corners. And it's about a young girl who recognizes that her eyes are different from her friends. And it's just a great story about how our eyes are beautiful too. And my students say, Miss G, your eyes kiss in the corners too. And it's just wonderful. And I'm so excited about the new bill and I want to be a part of that curriculum building. So one quick thing about cross-cultural solidarity from my background. It was not lost on my father, who was an immigrant from the Philippines, that it was Dr. King and the civil rights movement that paved the way for us to be here. And before it became a holiday, a national holiday, he took the day off and educated my brother and I about Dr. King, Medgar Evers, everybody. So why doesn't that happen? I feel like it was a unique experience for me. I'd really like to see that more in American history, more cross-cultural solidarity. So if you could speak to your experiences, how we can work together towards that. Thank you.
I think we've obviously talked about intersectionality, cross-cultural solidarity, how our stories are similar to stories in other communities. But I think it's important also to focus on which stories, right? And I think the model minority myth skews towards good stories, right? And stories of triumph and American dream stories and boat people came here and we made it stories. And we don't talk about the bad stories, you know, and
like Vincent Chin. I mean, there's some
Vincent Chin, my mother, a week before I was going to take the bar exam, I just got married to my Caucasian wife, and my father calls us in our home in Stamford, and she picks up the phone on Saturday morning, and my father says to Liz, you can't tell your husband because he's about to take the bar exam, but your mother-in-law was stabbed multiple times last night, and she almost died. But don't tell your husband. And of course, my wife was like, Will, it's your father on the phone. And it's messed up for a lot of reasons, that story. But this is an experience that, you know, my mother experienced in 2003, and we almost lost her. And we could be ashamed of that story because it happened in our little store in Manchester, Connecticut, where she, like every other Asian shop owner, was by herself and she was attacked. Or we can talk about it, right? And there are so many other people that live in communities that aren't always safe, or that, you know, run stores where they're by themselves. And these are the hard truths about what it means to be an immigrant in this country. And stories about struggling financially. We're not proud of that. My parents have struggled, and it's not always easy, and they've had businesses fail, right? And stories about being discriminated against and watched as you go through a store. Still, today, 49 years old, right? You can still feel those eyes on you. And I just think it's really important to, you know, the final thing I'll say is you know, my enduring memory as a child is my dad coming home, and he was wearing a cook's uniform. So it was our restaurant, but he had that white smock and checkered cook's pants, and it was splattered with Chinese food. And he smelled like he'd been carrying like chicken and pork and garbage and cooking all day. And that smell was like so strong. And a lot of other people whose parents, you know, are working people, and you know, they work in a market, or they work in a warehouse, you know, or they drove a truck. Like, those smells are real for them too. And I don't think we talk about that enough as a community. And if we are more vulnerable in a way, and don't always focus on being so strong all the time, and share that we have this experience that so many other people have too, that opens us up to other people and opens them up to us.
Being open about the struggle,
yeah,
as much as the success. I see we have another audience member, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's 8:15, so let's go ahead and have your question, and then maybe a final word from the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Wong. I'm a second-generation Chinese American, and fortunately to be born and raised in Hawaii, which is, I think, a very different experience than a lot of people who grew up in the mainland. And one of the things in my life, I actually have found being Chinese an advantage. And I just wondered if any of you had experiences where being Chinese was actually helpful in your growing up, your careers, et cetera, because, one of the things that, even though the stereotypes, sometimes we play the stereotypes as far as being smarter and everything else, but I think one of the things, I found that being different also stood out in the masses. And in my days in college, and also I was in the Navy, that being different gave me an opportunity to be different and to prove myself as being better or as good as anybody else. So I just wondered if your experiences of being Asian actually was an advantage to you growing up.
I can tell you one. I think I got my first job because I was Asian American. I'm sure I've lost many other opportunities because I was Asian American, because there was already an anchor or a reporter at that station who was Asian American. So we've already checked that box, next. But I will say the first job I had out of college, I know this, the general manager looked at my VHS tape, which was not very good, and said, you know what? We have a girl, Jane Park. She's leaving soon. I'm going to call the news director and tell her about you. And I'm thinking, Jane Park. Okay, that sounds like a Korean last name. Jane, probably a woman. I don't care. I'll go to Orlando. I'll take Jane Park's job. Fine, great. And I think about that sometimes because at the time, it was just so obvious. He was plugging a hole. It was like literally one for one. But that's how I got my start in the business. And I just don't focus on some of those things that I think are like our immutable characteristics. Like I'm a woman, I'm Asian, I'm short, whatever. There are things I cannot control or change about myself. So I try not to dwell on those things, but if it is advantageous in a way, sure, you work with it, and you also are aware of times where it might cost you an opportunity, right? And I think on balance, I focus on the things that I can control, and then I try not to worry about the rest. I kind of try to impart that on my daughters too, because there's a lot going on in the world, and there's lots of things we can work on and can change, so we can't be dwelling on those circumstances out of our control. But that's a funny question that you ask. Miriam, please.
So, growing up, I'm one of 3 children of immigrant parents from the southern part of China, Guangdong province. We were taught early on, as soon as we were able, we always had our family talks around the dinner table, and that prejudice and discrimination is what we have because we live in this country that is white America. So how does one deal with that, all right? You're going to get sneered at. You're going to get looks. Mm-hmm. You're going to get mumbling. You're going to get outright racial remarks, etc. It didn't get, at least at that point, as a teenager, to physical violence, all right? And so you just dealt with it. And I know that my first job as a teacher was in an almost in the ghetto, and so they needed another individual, and I fit the play because I wasn't black, I wasn't Latino, so here comes this Asian-looking gal who spoke perfect English. And by the way, if I had a nickel for every person who said, boy, you speak English well. Maybe it's because I was born here. Another thing, pet peeve, when I was giving some talks and some exchanges with individuals about the need for racial equality and inclusiveness, someone had said to me, well, haven't you heard about the melting pot? And I said to the person, I don't melt very well. Okay. And then when terminology, especially in the 60s, came about and Orientals became Asian American, and someone said that to me, well, aren't you Oriental? And I said, Oriental is a rug.
Okay.
Don't mess with Miriam.
It was like that for me. I was here for that transition, and it was like, oh, okay, Oriental is for things, Asian is for people. Got it.
Yes.
Yes, please, your question.
Yeah. So my name is Fan. I'm an immigrant, and I'm also on the board of OCAFC. Before my question, I want to share a story, a quick story. So my wife and I both from China, and we have twins, almost 9 years, a boy and a girl. So a few months ago at the dinner table, we were talking about race, discrimination, and my son, But that time was 8.5 years old, and he looked at me and he asked me, "So, Daddy, I'm white, right?" So, as a parent, you want the kids to have a normal childhood, as normal as possible. But on the other hand, as a parent, community, and the school system, I want to ask Miriam, how can we, educate the kids about race, discrimination, diversity, equality, and to prepare them better for their grown-up world?
Asians are the group that is most likely to be bullied in school. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And so we need to speak up. Each school, each district has a bullying policy, all right? Then each school has a designated individual, administrator, who handles those complaints, make those complaints and put it in writing. Insists on a meeting with the administrator and whoever was the giver of the comment, all right? And expect to meet with, if it's a student, then the parent or guardian of that student. Make waves, because that is the only way that things will change. Most of the conversation occurs in the hall, between passing, and on the playground. When I hear a comment, it doesn't matter if that student is on my caseload in my class. I heard that, and immediately it stops. It doesn't matter. It's an unkind comment. It doesn't matter who it's directed at. It is no place in a school environment. And if we all do that, it will change. But we have to be the ones to change. No one is going to do it for us. So we have to be the change agent.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And with that, I just want to thank everyone so much for your time, for your support, for coming out to learn more about this issue here in our community. And Patra, William, Miriam, Mike, thank you so much for your amazing. I think we could have this conversation for another 2 hours.
We could.
But it's a school night. But thank you so much, and thank you so much to Saren, too, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your experiences, your insight, and especially all the important work that you guys are working on. And thank you to Vicky for moderating such an amazing conversation tonight. I learned so much from all of you in that we are all so different, but yet our stories and struggles are the same, and our life experiences are the same. Thank you to the Westport Library for hosting us tonight, for giving us a space to host our event. Thank you to the OCAFC for partnering with us and for sponsoring the food and beverages for us tonight. But most importantly, thank you to all of you who are here today to support us and each other. This important conversation does not and should not stop here tonight. I hope that what you learned today will continue to spark meaningful conversation with you and your family in your homes as well as in your workplace. In addition to tonight's event, as Patra had mentioned a little bit earlier, we actually, as AAPI Westport, have organized a month-long celebration for the Westport community and beyond. I don't want to go through too much right now because I think it's kind of late, but I just wanted to highlight there's certain signs on the table that you can scan a QR code that will lead us directly to our website, that you can find the information, but the most up-to-date one will be on our website. So the next event we have is actually going to be on Saturday at the YMCA. It's going to be rain or shine. It's going to be AAPI performances, and there's going to be a food truck there. So I hope to see as many of you there, and good night, everyone. Thank you so much.